I'm back. Miss me? Let's see what happened since my last video. Okay, YouTube now has a handle system that's displayed in the comments to the username. That's stupid. And of course ColbysCorner was taken, so I had to slap a YT on the end there. Thanks YouTube. Keep it up. There can't be any swearing in monetized videos anymore? Huh. My Walking Dead videos might be in some trouble. Just kidding, my channel's not monetized.
Why are we still here?
Windows 95 was released on August 24th in the year take a friggin' guess, amid promises that it would be the company's most advanced operating system since the very first iteration almost a decade prior. To showcase this, Microsoft poured some $200 million into the advertising campaign, including producing a 30-minute promotional video starring Jennifer Aniston and Matthew Perry, fresh off the heels of the popular sitcom Friends, which premiered on NBC a year earlier.
Was the night before Christmas, and all through the warehouse, not a single piece of Microsoft merchandise was stirring, not even a mouse. Oh, please.
I know, it gets me too.
Microsoft also shelled out $3 million in royalties to use the song Start Me Up by the Rolling Stones in their advertising campaign, a reference to the Start menu.
It's a great song, Rolling Stones. Please don't claim my video.
Speaking of the Start menu, is one of the new features included in Windows 95 that have since become staples of the Windows OS that we all know and love, including the taskbar and longer file names, up to 250 characters.
That name is longer than 8.3 characters.
You know, for a lot of people, this feature alone is worth the price of admission to Windows 95.
The actual launch had no shortage of star power either, with Microsoft CEO Bill Gates being paired up with Jay Leno, then the host of The Tonight Show. The comedian brought a much-needed air of levity and relatability to the presentation, as well as a decent collection of moments that haven't aged all too well.
Hi, how you doing?
Hey, good. How are you?
Can I show you my mouse sometime?
Joystick, isn't it?
Sure.
Classy. With that much hype surrounding the operating system, it should come as no surprise that the sales numbers were astonishing, with 1 million copies shipped in the first 4 days, and 7 million in the 4 weeks following. Windows 95 was the company's first attempt at breaking into the consumer market as well as the business one, and it turned Microsoft into a household name on the same level as Ford or General Mills. As well as capturing the interest of average consumers, the OS also caught the eye of several game developers, eager to develop for a new system as the MS-DOS grew closer and closer to complete obsolescence. One of these developers was David Stafford, who, along with his colleagues Mike Sandage and Kevin Gleiner, founded Cinematronics LLC, a gaming development studio based in Santa Cruz, California. With Stafford as the business manager, Gleiner as the graphics designer, and Sandage as the coder, the studio seemed to be in good hands. The company was, according to Stafford, the first dedicated Windows developer studio. Cinematronics' first foray into game development was Firestorm, a 2D shooter. This game was met with reluctance from publishers who, thanks to the immense success of 1993's Doom, generally consider anything not in 3 dimensions to be severely outdated. Not one to ignore criticism, Cinematronics switched focuses and, no joke, began developing what was essentially a carbon copy of Doom. If you can't beat 'em, join 'em, I guess. Knowing that Microsoft wanted games to package with their new operating system, and trusting in the success that Windows 95 would bring, Stafford wanted to bring their new 3D game to Microsoft in hopes that it would be bundled with the OS. However, as Microsoft was in the midst of a legal battle over whether or not Internet Explorer violated antitrust laws, Stafford knew that Microsoft wouldn't be too keen on inviting even more bad press with a violent, bloody shooter game. Stafford's solution to this was something he later called an ungodly stupid one, replacing the bullets in their shooter game with globs of glue. This led to the studio's Doom clone being dubbed, 3 guesses, Gloom. That happened. That's a real thing that happened. Once development got going on the game, Stafford pitched the idea to David Cole, head of the Windows 95 production team. Cole was not impressed, with his response being a grumbled, "Can't we just get a game of pinball or something like that?" Not to be deterred by this less than warm reception, Stafford worked with a fellow Cinematronics artist to create an awful looking, super buggy demo of a 3D pinball game, a screenshot of which was sent over to Microsoft. To the team's surprise, they loved it. With Microsoft's go-ahead, Stafford pulled all of Cinematronics' resources into the new pinball game to be released alongside Windows 95, which was now only 9 months from launching. Graphics designer Kevin Gleiner had studied game design, but had never designed a game himself. To prepare himself for the job, he visited an arcade on the Santa Cruz boardwalk and studied the pinball machines to see how they worked. Meanwhile, Mike Sandage went to work on the game's code. It would have been much easier to make the game 2D, but without that third dimension, realism would have suffered. For example, Sandage wanted the ball to get smaller as it reached the back of the pinball machine, which could only be done if the game was in 3D. Adding details like this was questionable, as the team was on an extremely tight schedule. It may not seem like it nowadays, but the code behind Space Cadet Pinball was quite complicated, not to mention that it was being released on an operating system that hadn't even been released. They were designing, coding, bug testing, and creating art assets all at the same time. It's no surprise that the team were pulling upwards of 20-hour shifts just to finish the thing. But then something happened. Microsoft pushed the launch of Windows 95 back to August 1995. A disaster for Microsoft as it sent their stock price crashing through the floor, but it was a godsend for Cinematronics as it gave them more time to polish their game. And then the date finally arrived. Windows 95 was released in August of 1995, with all the fanfare you'd expect. Besides the previously mentioned expensive marketing campaign and cheesy 90s video starring Friends cast members, the Empire State Building was lit up in the classic Windows logo colors, and a 300-foot banner was unfurled down the side of the CN Tower in Toronto, Canada. Cinematronics' finished game, dubbed Space Cadet Pinball, was sent over to Microsoft, where David Plummer, a programmer most well known for creating the iconic Task Manager, made some adjustments to make sure the game would play smoothly on Windows 95. This included translating some code from assembly language to C++. The game was then released as part of Microsoft Plus, an enhancement for Windows 95 released on the same day as the OS. The game even makes an appearance in the aforementioned cheesy 90s video, with the characters enjoying the game a little bit too much.
So, what's 3D pinball?
You mean you've never played that?
No.
Nobody has. It's a new game in Microsoft Plus.
Fastest one there is. Oh my Target achieved. Isn't that what the kids say?
You're on my list.
With the financial backing of a company as big as Microsoft, Cinematronics went from a tiny startup to a fairly big name in PC game development. They moved offices from Santa Cruz, California to Austin, Texas, and grew to at least 26 employees. Their newfound fame soon caught the attention of Maxis, a game developer well known for creating the popular SimCity franchise. Impressed with their pinball game, Microsoft gave Cinematronics the funding to create a full version, to be called Full Tilt Pinball. The full game included 2 other tables along with the classic Space Cadet one, Dragon's Keep, a medieval fantasy-inspired table, and Skullduggery, a pirate-themed one. The game also supports a higher resolution than its Windows 95 counterpart, and the art on the side is pre-rendered 3D instead of a 2D image. Full Tilt Pinball happens to be the version that I have, so let's take a break from history and talk about the damn game already. I'll bet that brought back memories for some of you. Anyway, as for the actual game, well, it's a pinball game. The goal is to score as many points as possible before losing the ball. That's selling it a bit short though, because Full Tilt is a surprisingly complex game. The main draw of the game, at least the Space Cadet table, is to complete missions to increase your rank, of which there are 9. Hitting the mission targets will select a mission, and sending the ball up the launch ramp will accept the mission. Missions themselves vary quite a bit, and the flashing blue arrows on the table, as well as the text on the right, will let you know what you have to do to complete the mission. You'll also want to keep refueling by sending the ball down the launch ramp, because if you run out of fuel, all missions stop until you refuel. An interesting thing to note is that the completion of a mission in Full Tilt will result in a replay, whereas in the Windows version it just awarded you bonus points. And that's just barely scratching the surface of how deep the game can get. We haven't even gotten to the stuff that I can't even begin to understand. Wormholes, black holes, upgraded weapons, hyperspace bonuses, doubling jackpots. If you want to take the time to understand what these are and how to get them, then you are a more dedicated person than me. Bottom line, there's a lot here, and the game becomes surprisingly fun once you know how to properly play it. As far as controls go, the flippers are mapped to the Z and backslash keys, and the plunger is controlled by the spacebar. You can also shake the table by pressing X or period, which confused me at first. I'm not exactly a pinball aficionado, so I had no idea why you'd want to shake the table, especially because if you do it too much, the game scolds you and then ends. So I looked it up, and it turns out that in real life, pinball players will bump the table in order to influence the ball's movement. Machine manufacturers responded to this by installing sensors that would end the game if the table was tilted too much. This aspect of pinball was not only emulated in Full Tilt, but also in most digital pinball games. The more you know. Full Tilt Pinball was released on October 31st of 1995, just 2 months after its debut on Windows 95. The game sold well, netting Cinematronics over $500,000. Impressed by both the sales of the title as well as Cinematronics' experience developing games for Windows, Maxis offered to buy the studio, to which David Stafford accepted, happy with the recognition his tiny company had achieved in just 2 years. Cinematronics was then renamed to Maxis South, and began work on some brand new titles. Cinematronics' next project was Tri-Trist, a puzzle game somewhat similar to Tetris, in which players attempt to align groups of 3 tiles to get 3 or more icons to line up and disappear.
Are you looking for a high-speed challenge? Then you're ready for Tri-Trist.
Sounds like a tediously simple concept today, but back in '95 it was game design at its peak. Probably. Mike Sandage came up with the idea and coded the first version. With the help of programmer Jim Mitchell, Tri-Trist was finished in October of 1995. The game received very positive reviews from players, but unfortunately did not sell very well. It was published by the now defunct Virgin Interactive, and today exists on the internet as abandonware. Cinematronics also developed another puzzle game called Marble Drop, in which players tried to maneuver colored marbles into bins of the same color. Most excitingly, a Diablo-type game dubbed Crucible was also in development, but unfortunately the game would never come to be, as the studio was closed in 1997. Maxis had been struggling financially since before they acquired Cinematronics. Their SimCity money had all but dried up, and more recent games had sold poorly. The acquisition was more or less a Hail Mary to boost their game lineup, and it hadn't seemed to pay off. They lost $2 million in 1996, and their newest SimCity game, SimCity 3000, seemed doomed to fail. As mentioned before, 3D was the new big thing, but a 3D SimCity game at the time would require an almost impossible amount of polygons. Nevertheless, the game was shown off in 1997's E3, and was met with an incredibly negative reception. This was seen as the final nail in the coffin for Maxis, and the studio was acquired by EA later that year, who decided to shut down the Maxis South division. The 26 employees were all laid off and sent on their way, a rather sad conclusion to the iconic dev team. It's not all bad news though. Judging by the team's LinkedIn pages, they've all moved on to bigger and better things. David Stafford is currently a robotics scientist at Amazon, Kevin Gleiner founded and serves as the COO for a mobile games company, and Mike Sandage is a software engineer. And their pinball legacy didn't die with Windows 95 either. The game was also included in Windows 98, Windows 2000, Windows Me, and Windows XP, and there were several attempts to revive the game as a Microsoft Garage project. However, when Windows Vista shipped with a suspicious lack of pinball, people grew curious as to why. Raymond Chen, a programmer working for Microsoft, explained its absence in a 2012 blog post. According to Chen, when porting the game from 32 to 64-bit, a collision bug appeared where the ball would simply pass through objects. They tried to patch the bug, but as the code was several years old by this point and was created by an outside company, no one even began to understand how to fix the bug. The team simply decided that it wasn't worth the effort and dropped the game from Windows Vista. It was a pretty simple and understandable explanation for the game's absence, but there is one tiny problem with it. The 2005 release of Windows XP 64-bit edition does in fact contain a build of Pinball, with no game-breaking glitches to be found, which suggests that the game was indeed able to be ported to 64-bit. The game was even found in early builds of Windows Vista. This was all brought to light by the YouTuber NCommander, who showcased several 64-bit editions of the game that worked just fine. The video prompted another blog post by Raymond Chen, which contains a bunch of technical programming jargon that I don't understand. Long story short, the game's visual style had simply become outdated, and Microsoft was worried it would look out of place with their shiny new games developed by Oberon Media. Yeah, I remember them, the Purple Place guys. Man, the ColbysCorner lore is getting complicated. One last fun fact about Raymond Chen. He later stated that his proudest moment working for Microsoft had to do with Space Cadet Pinball. When the game was being ported from Windows 95 to Windows XP, the game somehow used 100% of the computer's CPU. When Chen looked into it, he discovered that the frame rate on the XP build was running at over 1 million frames per second. He added a limiter that capped the frame rate at 120 frames per second, which dropped the CPU usage down to 1%. Now, I bet a lot of you watching this video didn't even know that Space Cadet Pinball had been made into a full game, and that might be for a couple of reasons. Maybe Maxis just didn't market the game very well, or the acquisition by EA doomed both Maxis and Cinematronics to obscurity. But another reason might be a little bit more malicious. Some have speculated that Microsoft may have tried to conceal the existence of the full game. For one thing, in the Windows XP version of the game, the company names of Cinematronics and Maxis are in a blurry dark red font against a black background, whereas in the full release they are in a higher resolution bright yellow font. Also, if you click the About Pinball button, a text window will pop up telling you that the game was developed by Maxis, but did not mention the full tilt version of the game at all. Whether or not this conspiracy is actually true, the legacy of Space Cadet Pinball remains strong to this day. Several tutorials on how to download the game onto modern versions of Windows remain popular. Speedruns of the game have been posted on Twin Galaxies as recently as 2020, Mention the game to any 90s or 2000s kid, and they'll probably have a couple fond memories to tell you. The game recently garnered almost 5,000 upvotes on the subreddit r/nostalgia, with several commenters reminiscing about playing it as kids. On March 6th of 2020, rapper Lil Uzi Vert sampled some of the game's sound effects on their song You Better Move.
Ooh, you better move. Ooh, you better move. It's a great song, Lil Uzi. Please don't claim my video.
There is one final interesting story I have about Space Cadet Pinball. On September 4th of 2015, ticket machine screens at the
Chuzhou North Railway Station
had the pinball game displayed instead of whatever train-related stuff it was supposed to be showing. This sparked a bit of controversy among train lovers, who dubbed the train station Pinball North. The pinball game was deleted from the train station's operating system in response. I should be clear, I have no idea if this story is true or not. I can only find one article talking about it, and they cite a Chinese news website that, to put it simply, is not exactly a shining example of good webpage design. I couldn't find the original source on this webpage, so I can't confirm whether or not the story is true. So while it is very funny, take it with a grain of salt. Anyway, while the tiny startup company that slaved for 20 hours a day to create this masterpiece of a game has largely been forgotten, the game itself certainly has not. As David Stafford himself has said, I've had other startups since then, and have obviously learned and done better from an execution standpoint, but I don't think I've done anything that was quite as much fun as that. So to David and to everyone else that had a hand in making this 90s cult classic, Godspeed. Now if you'll excuse me, I've got some demons to kill. Can't we just get a game of pinball?